So first questions first, how is your caveman squat coming along? We've covered 4 parts so far: the introduction, pelvis, spine, and also the nerves we covered last time. So I'd be quite interested to know, get your feedback about how your caveman squat is coming along. Remember, you can take your side shot photo of your caveman squat each week just to have a comparison, see which area of the body you feel has contributed to limiting your caveman squat. So if you missed out on that first one where we did our benchmark, remember all you need to do is set your video, your photograph camera up on the side, and then you take a photo or an image of you squat down, see what position your body is in, and we start to get a benchmark of our start and finish point. So when it comes to the shoulders, particularly with the lifestyles we're leading at the moment, with regards to being bent over computers, checking our phone, looking down quite a lot, we're getting this very common round-shouldered posture, and people are talking about posture quite a lot. Posture is probably less important than the actual function within your shoulder. So what we're going to be looking at is actually function and capacity over the aesthetics. So this time we're talking about the shoulder and how the shoulder can impact directly on your ability to squat down A to G, or ass to grass, bum to heels, all the other various names that we call it, but basically the caveman squat. So you might wonder, well, how does the shoulder influence my squatting? And it may influence it more or less depending on the type of squat you're using. If you're using a bar or just body weight, that can also change or influence the ability to squat. Now, of course, aesthetics is always going to be a benchmark, but we shouldn't get too caught up in trying to look like somebody else. So as long as you function and perform well, correctly, without pain, or as comfortably as you can for you and your body, then you're in a good place. Don't worry about your lines too much. So to help us understand a little bit about how the shoulder can influence the squat, first of all, I want to use my model here of a shoulder, and if you can imagine this underneath the tissues and so on my body, you've got your clavicle, obviously the humerus, which is the arm, and then the scapula around the back, or something along those lines. The muscle in question that we're going to be looking at is commonly the one that will pull the shoulder forwards into a protracted position, because it attaches to this little point here, which is your coracoid process. And it pokes through this little sort of like indent, if you like, at the front, but it's actually the most forward or anterior part of your scapula. This little muscle comes from here and then travels down into sort of mid, 3rd, 4th, 5th rib. And so you can imagine how, if it is short, tight, in spasm, dysfunctional, it can actually pull the shoulder forwards and actually pull the scapula forwards and around the rib cage or the thoracic spine. So I'd like you to try something for me just now. If you stand up for me, and then I want you to imagine that your pec minors, this little muscle in the front of the chest, is actually pulling your shoulders forwards into this common issue of the rounded shoulder. Now, keeping that dysfunction, if you like, in place, try and lift your arms over your head. It's going to be pretty difficult with those scapula pulled and fixed around your rib cage. Also, try in that position to extend your thoracic spine. And I can assure you it's probably feeling quite difficult, isn't it? So, if you imagine having that dysfunction and then trying to squat down, it's going to actually pull the body weight forwards. If you then add a load onto the back, the load is going to travel forwards of the midfoot, destabilize you, put a load into the back, and feel pretty awkward and uncomfortable. Is this ringing any bells for any of you guys? Did you try that technique? Did you pull the shoulders forwards and then try and squat down and see what it felt like? Yeah, I'm sure it feels really weird. If you then open the shoulders up and imagine extending the spine and going down into your caveman squat, it's going to feel a little bit easier. So what we're going to be looking at today with the shoulder is how we can influence that pulling forwards through that little muscle in the front of the chest, how we can let that go, and also some strength training that can complement that. So once again, before we begin the exercises, what I want you to think about is this integrated system of the way the body works. And the pec minor muscle is a great example of how the chain can be influenced from one end of the body right down to the other end. Also, as always, the disclaimer, please do not try any of these without consulting your local therapist, practitioner, or biomechanics coach. Now, for this particular muscle, it's very difficult to test yourself. But what you can do is set up a camera at the end of your head end, lying on your back on the floor, and you'd be looking at how far back your shoulders drop towards the floor. Now, the ideal is that if you reach over your shoulder, you'll find the acromion process right at the edge of the spine of the scap, just on the edge there on the back of the shoulder. It's kind of a bony ledge across the back there. Ideally, this ledge, this acromion process should be 2.5 centimeters, about 1 inch, or a couple of fingers breadth from the floor. Now remember, if you're lying on your back, you've got gravity on your side. So if you're not that close to the floor, you're probably holding some dysfunction across the front of the chest. It may be you can ask a friend or a colleague to just try and measure off that bony landmark and just see if they can count how many fingers and maybe measure that gap. Ultimately, you need to have range and symmetry. So if we're looking at 4 or 5 fingers or 2 and 4, then there's something going on and we really need to do this exercise. So do you remember in the pelvis, we did an anti-spasm technique for the hips? We're going to use exactly the same technique on the shoulders to hopefully have the same effect. So I'm going to stand side on so you can see. So you want the shoulders back and relaxed. You place the opposite hand on the front of the opposite shoulder. And then what I'm going to do is push my shoulder into my hand, but with only 20% effort. Hold for 20 seconds, and then we repeat 4 times. So this hand, all it's doing is resisting the protraction of the opposite shoulder. We let it go, and we repeat. And we do 4 reps. Do 4 on each side. Maybe get your friend or your camera in position to just recheck, see whether that's opened up a little bit. And we're going to add in some strength training and another great technique to complement this exercise. So there are a couple of great techniques that will complement this protraction, as I've mentioned a moment ago. And so what we need to consider is, if the problem has been pulling forwards, we need to, after the anti-spasm, maybe address strength work to pull the shoulders back. Now, you may be familiar with things like rows to help with the retractors or to pull the scapula back. However, if you have this problem, there is a risk that you've been getting away with rowing and not actually pulling the scapula back. So this technique is going to maybe look and feel a little bit isolated, non-functional, but just to remind you, if you're not functioning, you cannot be functional. What we're doing is putting back the individual areas of the body that don't work so well. We're putting back the function in those areas to then get to the point where our row includes a fuller movement, including the retraction. So if you've got a resistance band, an elastic band, or something along these lines, you can get these quite cheaply from a variety of shops. I'm not going to say anything. You just need to tie it around something, maybe a stair banister, stand back, and then from here, obviously brace through the body, and then you just literally draw the scapula backwards, nice and slow, nice and controlled, and make sure you've got enough resistance that it's a challenge. It should feel quite tough. The idea is you're trying to strengthen that retracted position to complement the anti-spasm on the front of the shoulder. Now, if you haven't got a resistance band, you can use other kinds of weights, whether you've got kettlebells, barbells, dumbbells, or maybe something just heavy that you can tip over into a deadlift position, and you can try this. So find your weight, your body bar, or whatever it is you're going to be using. From here, you tip into a deadlift type position, and then again, retracting the shoulders, but the free weight is being pulled down by gravity, so you're resisting against gravity using whatever weight it is you have available. Your reps and sets really are dependent on you, where you're at in your training, your strengths, anything else you've got going on. You might start, if the weights are quite light, with 3 sets of 15 reps. If you're going quite heavy, that might feel a challenge. That might feel a challenge anyway. If you're relatively fit, athletic, you're already training, you could also try to slow down the eccentric portion of the movement. What I mean by that is when you pull the concentric, the lowering phase you take longer. This can enhance what you're doing, and you can do the same with the band. You just take longer as you let go. So concentric, and then even slower on the eccentric. So just to give you another example how you can do it with a single arm. So you might use the same position or hand onto a bench. From here again, just retract the shoulder, and you can use the concentric and then a much slower eccentric. Finally, one of my all-time favorite exercises to help improve and contribute to your thoracic spine's ability to extend. So if you remember early on, we talked about how the pec minor muscle can pull the shoulders forwards and limit your thoracic spine's ability to extend. What we need to be careful of is when we're trying to use equipment like foam rollers on the spine, we really don't want to be too aggressive in terms of rolling around with that foam roller in the spine. It can actually contribute to damaging the facet joints, which are spine limiters when it comes to movement, and they allow you to protect the discs and the spinal cord by their limitations. So if we wear them away, that's not great. We can't put them back. So a much nicer kind of way of giving your thoracic spine the ability to extend and complementing these shoulder techniques is to get a foam roller. If you haven't got a foam roller, you can roll up a mat or find something, a bit of pipe, which you might want to put a towel or something over to make it easier to lie on. And then what we're going to do is lay it down, sit on one end, and then as you lie back, you just let gravity do the work. So what's happening is the curvature of your equipment, your tool, ideally a foam roller, the long foam rollers, so that your coccyx and your head are on the foam roller. The ridge down the spine is a gentle way of allowing gravity to let the ligaments around the spine relax into extension. It's much kinder than rolling around and trying to really force the joints to move. And just 2 minutes a day, it actually feels quite nice. At the end of your workout, maybe if you sit at a desk all day, maybe at lunchtime you can take yours in and get your colleagues to have a lie down on it. Try it out, it really is quite incredible. They're not expensive tools to buy a foam roller. As I've said, I've just got a rolled up mat here as an example you could try out. So depending on what equipment you've got, just have a lie down, see how it feels. Also consider how, with the thoracic spine's ability to move, this can directly impact on your rib cage. Your rib cage is what moves to allow you to breathe in and out, and it's also protecting your organs. So having movement through the ribs allows you to breathe deeper. Maybe people with respiratory issues might find this a nice technique to just lie and breathe slowly and deeply while you're on that foam roller. 2 minutes a day. Try it and let me know how you get on. So that's it for this week. That is the shoulder. Do let me know how you get on. And next time, we're going to be looking at knee stability and how doing simple knee tests can indicate where you might need to use strength work to make your squat feel more stable. Now I have got reams of questions here about knees and feet, so we'll get onto the feet the following week, but next time watch out for knees.